All right, former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, John Bolton, joins us now to talk more about this. Sir, thank you for coming on. I think everybody agrees with what we're seeing here from Russia. What they potentially could do is not right. And I think everybody agrees that Ukraine deserves to have its own borders and to be a protected nation. The question, I think, tonight is, to what extent should Americans actually care about this problem, and how far should we go to try and help out?
Well, I think it's deeply important to the United States. You know, we have fought 3 wars in the 20th century, 2 hot wars and 1 cold war, where central issues involved peace and security in Europe. And a stable, peaceful Europe is a vital American national interest. We said at the end of World War II that we would never accept borders on the continent of Europe changed again by the use of military force, and yet Russia has done that, and they threaten to do it again. So even though Ukraine is not a member of NATO, where we have a commitment to collective defense, an attack on Ukraine could endanger key NATO allies like Poland, Romania, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, even countries that are not members of NATO like Sweden and Finland are very concerned about this. So you've got a century of history here that says America has a deep and vital interest in peace and security in Europe, and that's what's at stake here.
And I see your point. I want to bring up the other side of the argument is, though, and I think that the Republican Party has been taken over by a lot of people that don't believe that we need to be fighting and engaging in wars, that we don't need to be policing the world as much as we have in the past. There are even members of the previous administration that called you a bit of a war hawk. Do you understand why people would have less of an inclination to jump back into another country's problem, a country like Ukraine, which, as you said, is not a NATO ally, when we just got done with 20 years in Afghanistan?
Yeah, I think these situations are very different, but I will tell you something. The withdrawal from Afghanistan that the Biden administration conducted, but which President Trump would have done had he been reelected, has been a catastrophic strategic mistake for the United States. And the weakness that we showed in withdrawing from Afghanistan is playing out in the minds of decision makers in the Kremlin, particularly Vladimir Putin, and in the minds of key decision makers in Beijing, threatening Taiwan, threatening Southeast Asia. So this is a real test here. And, you know, you say people have taken over the Republican Party who don't agree with me. I don't think they've taken it over at all. If you look at the statements of members of Congress, Republicans in the House and the Senate, overwhelmingly taking a very strong stand here, very critical of the weakness of the Biden administration approach.
And I agree with the weakness part of it, but let me ask you this. What percentage of Americans do you think support sending American troops in to potentially fight against the Russians over Ukraine?
Well, I don't know what the answer to that is, but, you know, I think the American people deserve to have their leaders explain what the rationale for their policies is. And I will say, over successive recent administrations, this one, the former one, and the Obama administration, there has not been adequate discussion by leaders about what America's stake in the world is. It's a big stake, and it makes a big difference to our standard of living and way of life here. So I'm happy to have a broader political discussion on America's proper role in the world. It's not to be the policeman, but it most assuredly is to protect American national interest. And those are at stake in Ukraine. If Russia violates Ukraine's border and gets away with it, other countries in Europe are threatened. Other countries in other parts of the world where America's protection and guarantees are seen to be weakened, they're threatened too. World order doesn't exist because of international law. It exists because of our presence. And when that is called into question, our interests are endangered.
So some might say, you know, some people look at NATO and they bring up the criticisms, and they're rightful criticisms, that you have countries that don't build up enough military to even meet their obligations to NATO. They don't put in the 2% into their own military. That NATO is fully, I think, fully reliant on the United States to really support it. You know, I think some people might say, well, you know what, let's let some of these other countries, you know, why can't Poland, why can't some of these other countries, I think you said Belarus, Hungary, why can't they go in there and fix this problem? Why would it need the United States to come in and save the day?
Well, Poland spends considerably more than 2% of its GDP on defense.
So Poland's a good
it's
example.
really the major problem. The major problem is Germany, really, and that's an issue, and it's been an issue for a long time that the Europeans don't pay their fair share. That was a criticism even Barack Obama made.
Yeah.
But we're not doing this for charity for the Europeans. We're doing this because it's in our interest to do so. And that remains, as I said, for a century, America has worried about instability and war on Europe having a negative impact on our way of life here in America.
It does. But I guess it's just frustrating. I mean, there's a lot of countries in Europe. There's a lot of countries in NATO. Do you think that should the United States fully engage? Should the United States send troops if it gets to that point?
Well, the purpose of what NATO has done successfully since the alliance was created 70 years ago is deter Russian conduct that threatens NATO countries. NATO has not gone to war because Russia has never dared to cross the border of a NATO country. So the problem with the
This
Biden
isn't a NATO
approach
country.
here, well, let me finish. The problem with the Biden approach is it has failed to deter Russia adequately. It's not a NATO country, that's true. But, look at a map.
Yeah.
And ask yourself what the fall of Ukraine would mean to Poland, what it would mean to the Baltic republics, to Romania, to Bulgaria, and to others. That's why this is something that NATO and the United States really should be very closely paying attention to.
But like you said, the NATO alliances have prevented this Russian aggression for a long time. Why are you so sure that let's say they take Ukraine, and that wouldn't be a good thing. Obviously, nobody wants that to happen. Let's say they take Ukraine. Why are you so certain that that would mean that they would move on to then invade NATO countries? Because I think that would be crossing a big line.
Well, maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't. Part of the problem here is that in the Obama administration, Russia annexed the Crimea and effectively took control of eastern Ukraine, and nothing happened. So America's credibility has been diminished, and it's been diminished again here. And it looks like with the division in Europe because of German weakness, that NATO itself really, I think, is in some danger. And if you're Vladimir Putin and you believe Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania are still part of Russia and never should have been admitted to NATO, they're very much in jeopardy.
Okay. I knew it was going to be an interesting conversation. Former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, John Bolton. Sir, thank you so much for taking the time again. Good to see you.
Glad to be with you.